Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to today's episode of What Did I Get Myself Into? Well, let me tell you what I got myself into here. This is the CaDA Master Italian Supercar, a yellow Ferrari for all intents and purposes. What took over my brain to decide I wanted to try and build this behemoth? This 3,187 piece Technic style model with remote control and working 4-speed transmission. Well, kind of all of that stuff really. I just kind of wanted to see if I could do it. And while I'm not a huge car guy, I do like the idea of yellow sports cars or yellow performance cars. And this specific model was mentioned, I believe, in a comment by the designer himself, Bruno Jensen. The comment was on a Clever Pig video for a different CaDA model, and I just thought, well, let's see what it costs and whether or not I want to take on the challenge to see if I can build this huge Technic model. So we're going to see how this goes. I've budgeted pretty much a whole weekend to try and get it done. Technic is not my area of expertise, but all brick building or Technic building is an area of curiosity. So I thought I'd take a look and see if I can give this a shot and see if I can make it. When you first open the box, you're presented with more boxes, all shaped and colored to look like the front of the car. There appear to be 6 manuals, 2 plastic sleeves with 3 manuals each, and it looks like we've got what looks like not a very big sticker sheet and instructions on how to use the remote control. And each box, I'm guessing, corresponds to a manual, as there's a number on the side of each one. So what I'm going to do is just start from the beginning and maybe take breaks after each box and maybe film a little bit just to show you how it's going. So wish me luck. Okay, so bag 1 is done, and we've got the front of our car along with some suspension pieces, and it looks like the beginnings of a steering mechanism, and that involved installing a motor. Now, I should say this is not necessarily just box 1. As I very quickly discovered, the numbers on the boxes, first of all, don't correspond to the numbers of instruction manuals. So even though there's 6 manuals and 6 boxes, that's not how it works. It turns out that all the pieces in box 1 are necessary to build this front part of the car, but we also needed parts from box 6, which is what contains all the different Technic pins that this model uses, and there is quite a large variety, and this is what's left after you finished with, or after I finished with box 1. And there's also some other, these are flexible pieces. They will, I'm sure, be used later in the build, but you also had to use box 5, which has all the motors. It also has the remote and the battery box, which is not pictured here because I've got the battery charging at the moment. You get a piece separator, and this is very unique. It's got different connectors or different places on it that you can use to pull or poke pieces. In fact, the end here is supposed to work like some type of tweezers for pulling out Technic pins. And then finally, we have an odd assortment of extra pieces from bag 1, which normally you wouldn't have a shock absorber and 2 of these Technic type pieces as an extra in any type of building set, but maybe they're just used later in the build. Of course, I'm going to hang on to them, but I went through the instructions twice and I did not see where those were used. So here's hoping that they do get used later or that I didn't make a mistake. Here is the completed build from box 2, which definitely was a step up in difficulty and a lesson to be learned in the dangers of distracted building. I made the mistake of trying to catch up on season 1 of Andor while building this, kind of alternating between the 2, and definitely made lots of mistakes along the way. And actually it will be a miracle if this all works, because this is all the engines and gears, and we can't really see much of it because it's all covered off on the inside. But there was one section of the build where On around step 24 of this box, I built something upside down. And while I thought I had corrected that, there was one very critical part I had not corrected and didn't notice that till step 135. So that was not a very pleasant experience to go back and try and fix that. In fact, I ended up chipping off the edge of one of the Technic axles. One thing I'm very quickly learning is that the Technic axles, especially the ones other than the light gray, they are in there to stay. They do not slide easily. We also have this curious pile of extra parts where there's no additional like 1x1 parts because those were all grouped together with all the extra pins, but these are all Technic axles and some other Technic parts. And most curious is these here is these pieces are actually metal. They're not metal coated plastic. And seeing as there's two of them and I didn't use any of them in the build, I'm wondering if they were just alternative parts. The manual didn't suggest that unless it's in some of the other manuals. There are 6 manuals to this model, and here box 2 took up the end of manual 1, all of manual 2, and the first 15-20 pages or so of manual 3. So I just wonder if there's some section that says, hey, you can substitute these parts if you want. But we're going to set this aside, and bag 3 or box 3 is going to be the parts for what will be the middle of the car, and I think at the end we're going to put them all together. All right, we're done with box 3, and actually a little bit of box 4 because of some unusual way that the instructions are put together, but we'll just take a quick look here. We have the front and the back now attached to a new middle along with seats. You can see our motor here in the back, and we've got the battery already installed in the front, so all the electrical components are now installed. So my guess is most of the rest of the model is going to be the outer coverings. Now what I said about this being more than just box 3 is because of the unusual way the instructions are set up. As I showed at the beginning, there are 6 boxes numbered 1 through 6, and I thought each of them would have parts labeled 1 through 6, but it turns out when I was building through all the parts labeled in bag 3, but it turns out the instructions actually are separated into 5 sections, and they're actually labeled A through E. Now, A and B both corresponded to boxes 1 and 2, but C, I was still building on part C when I ran out of parts from the bags numbered 3. So I grabbed all the bags numbered 4, which actually weren't very many, which were in box 4, but I also found in box 4 there were bags labeled with the number 5. Anyway, I went ahead and built with all the pieces that were in the bags numbered 4, which actually went clear into 15 steps of part D of the manual. So in other words, after the first 2 numbered bags, there seems to be no correlation between the letters in the manual and the numbers on the bag. But the last parts that I built were these 2 seats, and now we're actually on bags number 5 in the middle of section D of the manual. Okay, here we are after all the parts labeled in bag number 5, and we've got most of a car here. We just need to add some wheels and some tops to it. The most interesting part of this build was building the doors, which stay latched shut, but actually have a working door handle, where if you pull that out, it allows the doors to open. It was a little frustrating at first because I didn't realize that that function was even there, and I wondered why will the doors not close until one of them accidentally actually came open. So that was lucky. It even kind of snaps shut too to let you know that that door is locked shut. All that's left is to do the top and the wheels and test this thing out. So there we have it, the completed yellow Italian supercar. And I have to say, I think it looks pretty good, and especially really good for someone like me who has never built a model in this scale before, or any Technic model with this high of a piece count. Let's take a closer look at some of the details from the last set of pieces. Here at the front, we have the hood that lifts up, and you can tip it back all the way like this, but it also has a little rod here that will hold it up if that's how you prefer to display it. Inside, you've got the battery box with all the connections, and that battery box works like a Technic hub. It'll have a Bluetooth connector to a remote, which is something I have not yet tested. We have lights here in the front, which look a lot like the Lego brand lights, except one of mine was actually broken here. See if you can see. It doesn't have the plastic covering over the wires like the other light does here. There are rear lights also, but the rear lights didn't have this problem. In the back, we have the engine, and for some reason we have an engine cover that's completely hollow, but it's there. And this here, I'm not entirely sure what this knob is, but I think it might be to disengage or re-engage the motors. It doesn't turn all the way, which worries me because I know that I had some problems when I got the gears installed, and I'm just wondering if something is out of alignment. And that right there is a sticker on top of that piece, so the sticker might also be out of alignment. In the back here, we have tail lights. There are lights that go inside of there that the back does not open up any more than this bit does. And on the inside, the dash was built earlier, but there we get a look at it through a window. The steering wheel does actually control the steering, but there's actually already motors hooked in, and I think that I can't turn the wheels manually while it's connected to the motors. There really wasn't an option in the instructions to not build the model with motors, but I wanted to try it with the motors installed anyway, so that's why I built it this way. And overall, the build experience was pretty good, as long as I kept in mind to keep everything slow and steady, because as I mentioned earlier, I made lots of mistakes, especially in the area of the gearbox. I didn't have any problem with the quality of the parts. There are some connections that I think could be a little bit tighter, like this right here. That is bare. I mean, there's like no friction to hold that clip in. And I think we've got another one here. I don't even know. This is supposed to be like an air vent on the inside, I guess. And it goes inside that red Technic pin, and there's no friction on that, which kind of surprised me. Here we can see the engine pistons moving as we push the car, but we also hear the car complaining because I'm pushing it while it has the motors attached. And there are 4 separate motors involved in this build. I think 2 of them are the rear wheel drive. One of them is a gear shifter, and one of them is the steering. But we'll test out the motorized functions in just a moment. And I admit I'm a little leery of doing that because I know I made so many mistakes installing the gears, and it'll be a miracle if any of the functions actually work. All right, before we get on to the final test, I wanted to go through the types of Technic pins that you get that are packaged all separately. The main Technic pin here, the plain black Technic pin, is just like a Lego black Technic pin. You get a bunch of these longer pins. They all come in black instead of in a regular Lego brand set. This type of pin would be blue. And I have to say, I know one of the complaints that Technic builders have about Lego is all the different colors of pins that are very visible throughout the build. And that's something that doesn't bother me personally, but I know it's important to a lot of other builders. And I always figured that Lego did that to make their pins easier to see so you would know what part you were getting. But with all the pins already being packaged separately in this CaDA set, and I put them all in little tubs separately, and I knew which one was which, I had no problem at all working on this, knowing that all the pins were the same color because I knew that I had them all packaged separately. So if an amateur like me can do this without having to see all the different colors of pins, then I don't think it should be a big deal for other companies to make their models look better by using the same color pin as long as they package them separately. This type of pin, lots of these that can accept a Technic axle on the end. Then we have these pins, which are half axle and half pin, Lots of these. Again, these all come in black, not like the blue like you would see in Lego brand. Lots of these 2-length Technic axles, also in black, not in red. We get a bunch of these half pins, all in light bluish gray, no blue or anything. There are a few red pins, and I'm not sure what the difference is between a red pin and a black pin, but I always thought the red pins were a higher friction, but I'm not sure. There are no frictionless pins, no light bluish gray pins, full-length pins anyway, in this set. I really don't know what the red ones are for and why you couldn't use a black one in its place. And we also get some longer pins where we've got a 2-length of pin and 1 length of axle. And this actually was the most difficult piece to deal with as far as these Technic pins, just these dark bluish gray pins. The pin side was always difficult to get shoved into a connection. In fact, with this connection here, which has 14 connection points, not for the faint of heart, that thankfully I did have all lined up, but it was the 2 gray pins in here that I could not get to push through because they were the hardest to push through. I ended up taking them out of one side and putting them in the other, and then I was able to get the whole connection to work just fine. And finally, the 2-length axle with 1 length of pin. There's lots of these. And actually, pins like this and several others were all packaged together, but they're easy enough to pick through, and you don't have as many of these as you do of all of these. And then finally, one more note about the Technic axles. You get axles in light bluish gray. I think this is dark tan, and you get dark bluish gray. And we also have black, but I don't have one among the spares right now. And these all work fine. The only problem I had was with axles of this color were extremely hard to push through and even harder to pull out if you made a mistake. So, but other than that, the difficulty with the dark bluish gray pin here and the tan axle, I had no problem with any of the parts. And this was a really enjoyable way to spend a 3-day weekend. Now the question is, will the remote work? Will the car drive? Will it steer? Will the lights come on? Well, let's find out. All right, so I started testing with the motor, and the good news is the motor does work. One of the many pieces of bad news, first of all, I can't run a test outside. It's freezing cold and there's snow and ice everywhere. So I've only tested it just in little short spurts here on the table. Another piece of good news is the steering does work. But the bad news is I did not get it centered when I put the model together. So its center position is actually pointing right. And you can probably see as I turn left, it doesn't turn very far. But when I turn right, it turns a lot farther. So that's something that needs fixed. And also, there is supposed to be a working gear shift. And that definitely is not working. It does try to do something. You can, I don't know if you can hear it, or you can see the knob twisting right here on the top. I mean, you can see it's definitely trying. And I found that that knob will shift the gears if you turn it hard enough, but it takes way too much effort to turn. And also, the car does not sound very good when it runs, which tells me the gears are not working properly. Actually, that's as good as it sounded the whole time, but it's supposed to be a 4-speed transmission, and it seems to only have 2 shifting possibilities. Here I'm going to hold it up just so I can run the wheels and you can hear what it sounds like. Yeah, I don't know if you hear that cracking, but that's, I'm guessing, not what the car is supposed to sound like. And it only goes in reverse a little bit. Let me try shifting the gears again. So there's definitely work to be done. But I think that's a project for another time. I'm not ready to dedicate another 3 days to taking this apart to get the gears working at this moment, but I promise I will get back to it at some point. So thanks for stopping by to check out my first attempt to build one of these 1/8 scale Technic models of this kind. I really appreciate all of you who stopped by to watch. And remember, today is a good day to build.